The morning sun cast long, golden stripes across the worn linoleum floor of the Sunrise Griddle, a place that smelled of old coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint, sweet promise of a new day. For most, it was a sanctuary of simple comforts, a place where a hot meal could soothe the soul. But on this day, the warmth of the diner was about to be challenged by a cold, biting cruelty, a darkness that had no place among the butter and syrup. In a booth tucked away in the corner, almost trying to merge with the shadows, sat a man named Arthur. His face was a roadmap of a hard-lived life, etched with lines of worry and weariness that the morning light couldn't soften. His beard was unkempt, streaked with gray, and his hands, calloused and rough, trembled slightly as he held a thick ceramic mug of black coffee. He wore a faded army jacket, the last remnant of a life he barely recognized anymore, a life of purpose, of honor, of a home. Now, his home was the unforgiving streets, and this small meal, a plate of scrambled eggs and toast he'd saved up for all week, was a fleeting moment of luxury. Arthur kept his eyes down, focused on the steam rising from his plate. He had learned long ago that invisibility was his best defense. To be unseen was to be safe. He ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite as if it were his last. The clatter of cutlery and the low murmur of conversation around him was a comforting hum, a temporary shield against the harsh silence of his reality. But that shield was about to be shattered. The diner's bell jingled sharply, announcing the arrival of 3 young men. They swaggered in with the unearned confidence of youth and privilege, their expensive sneakers squeaking on the clean floor. They were college kids, loud and boisterous, their laughter echoing with an arrogant, grating edge. They slid into the booth directly across from Arthur, their movements careless, their voices cutting through the diner's peaceful ambience. The leader, a young man with a chiseled jaw and cold, dismissive eyes named Chad, immediately noticed Arthur. He leaned over to his friends, Kyle and Brandon, and spoke in a stage whisper designed to be overheard. "Smell that?" Chad sneered, wrinkling his nose in performative disgust. "Smells like broke and desperate in here. Guess they let anyone in off the street now." Arthur froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. His shoulders tensed. He didn't look up. He just continued to stare at his plate, his heart beginning to pound a heavy, anxious rhythm against his ribs. He had heard it all before. The insults were like stones thrown day after day, they didn't always break the skin, but the bruises they left on his spirit were deep and lasting. He just wanted to finish his meal. He just wanted to be left alone. But they weren't finished. Emboldened by Arthur's silence, their taunts grew louder. "Hey, old man," Kyle chimed in, "you gonna finish that? Or are you just gonna stare at it all day? Some of us have to look at you." The waitress, a young woman named Maria with kind eyes and a weary expression, shot a nervous glance toward the commotion. She wanted to intervene, to say something, but a trio of entitled young men who probably had lawyers for fathers was an intimidating sight. She clutched her coffee pot, fear and frustration warring on her face. Other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A family man pulled his child a little closer. An elderly couple shook their heads in silent disapproval. But no one spoke. No one moved. The diner had become a theater of silent complicity. Arthur's hands began to tremble more violently. He remembered a time when he wouldn't have stood for this. Sergeant Evans, they had called him. A man who commanded respect, who led his platoon with a steady voice and an unwavering sense of duty. He had faced down real enemies in the dust and heat of places far from home. He had protected the men to his left and right. But the war at home, the one he fought against loss, grief, and despair, had been a different battle. It had stripped him of his armor, piece by piece, until all that was left was this shell of a man, trying to eat his eggs in peace. Chad, seeing the tremor in Arthur's hands, saw not a man struggling, but an opportunity for sport. He stood up, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "You know what? I think he's had enough," Chad declared to the diner. He strode over to Arthur's booth. "Charity's over, pal." With a swift, contemptuous motion, Chad slapped the plate from the table. It flew through the air, a tragic arc of white porcelain and yellow eggs, before crashing onto the tiled floor with a sickening shatter. The toast and bacon scattered across the linoleum like fallen soldiers. The diner gasped. The sound of the breaking plate was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Arthur stared at the mess on the floor, his one good meal of the week, now just garbage at his feet. Humiliation, hot and sharp, burned behind his eyes. It was a wound far deeper than hunger. It was the theft of his dignity. But Chad wasn't done. He reached down, grabbed Arthur's worn jacket, and shoved him hard against the back of the booth. "Get out of here, you bum," he spat, his face inches from Arthur's. "You're ruining everyone's appetite." The laughter from Kyle and Brandon was sharp and cruel, cutting through the stunned silence. Arthur finally looked up, and in his eyes, for the first time, wasn't fear, but a flicker of the old sergeant. A deep, sorrowful anger. But what could he do? He was one man, broken and alone, against three who were strong and full of venom. He slowly, painfully, bent down, his old joints protesting, and began to pick up the larger shards of the broken plate, his hands shaking so much he could barely grasp them. If you believe that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, that compassion is not a weakness but our greatest strength, and that no one, no matter their circumstances, should suffer this kind of humiliation, then please, take a moment right now. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell the stories that matter, stories that remind us that even in the darkest moments, a single act of kindness can change everything. As Arthur fumbled with the broken pieces, a tear he could no longer hold back slid down his cheek and fell onto the ruined food. At that moment, he felt utterly, completely alone. But he wasn't. The waitress, Maria, had seen enough. Her fear was eclipsed by a righteous fury. She spun around and disappeared into the kitchen, her face a mask of determination. She wasn't calling the police, she knew that would be a slow, complicated process that might only make things worse for Arthur. She was making a different call. A call to the one person she knew who didn't tolerate bullies. Her uncle. An uncle who happened to be the president of the local Hells Angels motorcycle club. Her voice was a hushed, urgent whisper into the phone. "Uncle Frank? It's Maria. I'm at the diner. There are some guys here. They're hurting an old man, a homeless vet. You need to come. Please, come now." She hung up. She didn't know if he would come, or how long it would take. But she had done something. She had refused to be a bystander. Back in the diner, Chad and his friends were basking in their perceived victory, bragging loudly about teaching the bum a lesson. They ordered another round of milkshakes, oblivious to the storm they had just summoned. It did not take an hour. It did not take 30 minutes. It took exactly 5. It began as a distant tremor, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floor of the diner. Conversations faltered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Heads turned toward the large plate glass windows. The growl intensified, multiplying, swelling into a deafening, earth-shaking roar. It was the sound of thunder, of an approaching army. And then they appeared. One by one, then 10 by 10, motorcycles poured into the parking lot. A tidal wave of polished chrome and black leather, they filled every available space, their engines snarling in a symphony of raw power. This wasn't a small group. This was a chapter. This was a statement. The number was staggering, 50, 80, 100 bikes, each one bearing the iconic, feared insignia of the Hells Angels. They formed a perfect, intimidating perimeter around the Sunrise Griddle, sealing it off from the outside world. Inside, the diner had gone deathly silent. The air crackled with a new, palpable tension. Chad and his friends stopped laughing. The color drained from their faces as they stared out the window, their arrogant smirks melting into slack-jawed terror. They knew the reputation. They knew the legends. These were not men you crossed. The bell on the diner door jingled softly, a sound now completely dwarfed by the heavy, oppressive silence that followed. The man who walked in was built like a mountain. His name was Frank, but to his brothers, he was Grizz. His beard was thick and gray, his eyes were the color of steel, and his leather vest, or cut, was heavy with the patches that told the story of his life, a life of loyalty, brotherhood, and a code of honor that the boys in the booth could never comprehend. He was followed by a dozen of his ranking members, each man an imposing presence, their collective gaze sweeping the room with cold, analytical precision. The rest of the 100 men stood outside, a silent, menacing wall of leather and steel. Grizz's eyes scanned the scene, the terrified patrons, his niece Maria standing by the kitchen door with tears in her eyes, the smirking bullies now pale and trembling, and finally, the old man in the corner, on his hands and knees, still trying to clean up a mess that wasn't his to make. Grizz's hard gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at Arthur. He saw the faded army jacket. He saw the stoop of a man who had carried too much for too long. But then he saw something else. On Arthur's forearm, exposed as his sleeve had ridden up, was a faded tattoo, a specific divisional insignia from the 101st Airborne. Grizz's breath hitched. He moved forward, his heavy boots thudding on the floor like drumbeats of judgment. He walked past the bullies' table as if they were nothing more than furniture. He knelt down beside Arthur, his massive frame making the old soldier look even more frail. "Soldier," Grizz said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was surprisingly gentle. He pointed to the tattoo. "Screaming eagles." Arthur looked up, startled, his eyes red-rimmed and full of confusion. He nodded weakly. "A long time ago," he whispered. Grizz's eyes narrowed, not with anger at Arthur, but at the injustice of it all. "You don't stop being a soldier," he said, his voice firm. He then looked at the mess on the floor. "Did they do this to you?" Arthur just nodded again, a fresh wave of shame washing over him. Grizz placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Get up, Sergeant. You don't kneel for anyone." He helped Arthur to his feet and guided him back into the booth. "You sit right here. We'll handle this." Then, Grizz turned. He moved with a slow, deliberate menace that was more terrifying than any shout. He stopped at the bullies' table, his shadow falling over them like an eclipse. Chad, Kyle, and Brandon shrank back into the vinyl, trying to make themselves small. "Which one of you," Grizz began, his voice dangerously quiet, "thought it was a good idea to put your hands on a veteran?" Chad, attempting a pathetic shred of his earlier bravado, stammered, "He was a bum. He was stinking up the place." Grizz leaned in closer, his knuckles resting on their table. The diner held its collective breath. "This bum," Grizz growled, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream, "has done more for this country than you three privileged cowards will do in your entire miserable lives. He has earned the right to eat a meal in peace. A right you thought you could take away from him. You don't know what strength is. You think it's picking on a man when he's down. That's not strength. That's weakness. It's a disease." He straightened up and pointed a thick finger at the shattered plate on the floor. "You're going to clean that up," he commanded. "All of it. On your hands and knees. With your bare hands." The three boys stared, horrified. "Now," Grizz roared, and they scrambled out of the booth, falling over each other in their haste to obey. As they began to shamefully pick up the pieces of food and ceramic, Grizz continued his lesson. "Then, you're going to empty your wallets. All of it. The cash, the credit cards your daddy gave you. You're going to give it to this man as a down payment for the respect you owe him." Sobbing now, they did as they were told, pulling out wads of cash and cards and placing them on the table in front of Arthur. "But that's not all," Grizz said, his voice softening slightly as he looked back at Arthur, then hardening again as he addressed the boys. "You're going to walk out of this diner, past my 100 brothers waiting outside, and you're going to remember this humiliation. You're going to remember what it feels like. And you're going to pray you never, ever disrespect another human being again. He gestured to the door. The boys, having cleaned the floor, stumbled towards the exit, heads bowed in complete and utter disgrace. As they walked out, a gauntlet of silent, imposing bikers stared them down, their collective glare a tangible force. The boys broke into a run, fleeing into the morning light, their arrogance shattered forever. Grizz turned back to the now silent diner. He walked over to Maria and gave her a gentle hug. "Good job, kiddo," he murmured. Then he returned to Arthur's table. He swept the pile of money and cards into a bag. "This is yours," he said, handing it to Arthur. "But we're not done." He motioned for his men, who now brought in plates of food. Not just one meal, but a feast. Pancakes, steak, eggs, pie, milkshakes. They filled the table. "You're eating with us today, Sergeant," Grizz said, sliding into the booth opposite Arthur. His men filled the surrounding booths. The Hells Angels, feared by many, sat down for breakfast with a homeless veteran, their laughter now warm and inclusive. Grizz asked Arthur his story, and for the first time in years, Arthur told it. He spoke of his service, of losing his wife and job in a cruel twist of fate, of the slow, painful slide into homelessness. The bikers listened, not with pity, but with empathy and respect. They were a brotherhood, and they recognized a fallen brother. When the meal was over, Grizz did one last thing. He took off his own leather cut, the vest that symbolized his identity and his rank, and held it out. It was a spare, one he kept for special occasions. It was clean, the leather worn but strong. "We run a custom bike shop just outside of town," Grizz said. "We have a spare room upstairs. And we could always use a good man who knows his way around an engine. It's not a palace, but it's a start. A second chance." He laid the vest on the table. "This is yours, if you want it. Your family now." Tears streamed down Arthur's face, but for the first time in a decade, they were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming, earth-shattering hope. In the span of a single morning, he had gone from being invisible trash to being seen as a hero, from being alone to being embraced by a family of 100 brothers. The entire diner, patrons and staff alike, erupted into applause. Maria was openly weeping with joy. Arthur, with a trembling hand, reached out and touched the leather vest. He had a home again. This story is a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear leather and ride motorcycles. It shows us that beneath a rough exterior can beat the kindest of hearts, and that true strength is measured not by how we treat our equals, but by how we lift up the fallen. If this story touched your soul and reaffirmed your faith in humanity, please, help us spread this message. Like this video, subscribe to Kindness Corner, and share it with your friends and family. Your support is what allows us to continue finding and sharing these incredible moments of compassion. And before you go, we have one question for you. We ask this on every video because we believe your voice matters. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done if you were in that diner that day? Would you have been a bystander, or would you have found the courage to stand up for Arthur? Your answer might just inspire someone else to be a hero when the time comes. Thank you for watching.